In the fall of 2002, a young man walked into a movie theater somewhere in Los Angeles. He was 26 years old. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a face that millions of teenage girls had once taped to the inside of their locker doors. He bought a ticket for a film called Heart's War, a World War II drama starring Bruce Willis and Colin Farrell. He had driven to this theater for a specific reason. He had a part in this movie. A small part, a supporting role as a prisoner of war named Private Louis P. Wakely, but a real one. A speaking role in a serious, dramatic film. The kind of project that could remind casting directors and producers and anyone who had forgotten that he existed, that he could act, that he was more than a face on the cover of Tiger Beat magazine. He sat in the dark and watched the movie unspool, 2 hours and 5 minutes. And when the credits rolled, he walked out into the California light knowing that nearly every frame he had shot, his scene, his one real chance, had been cut from the final print. He was barely visible in the movie at all. A background figure, a face glimpsed among a group of American soldiers during a roll call scene at a German prisoner of war camp. No lines, no close-up, no moment. If you knew exactly where to look, at 30 minutes and 7 seconds into the film, you could spot him standing just behind a soldier with a blanket draped over his head, on the left side of the frame. But nobody was looking for him. That was the whole problem. Nobody had been looking for Jonathan Brandis for a very long time. And now he had been erased from the one thing he believed might change that. To understand how he ended up in that seat in that theater, and what happened in the 13 months between that afternoon and the worst night of his life, we need to go back to the very beginning. Back to a small city in Connecticut, a Buster Brown catalog, and a 2-year-old boy who looked like he had been designed by Central Casting. Jonathan Gregory Brandis was born on April 13, 1976, in Danbury, Connecticut. He was the only child of Gregory Brandis, a food distributor and volunteer firefighter, and Mary Brandis, a schoolteacher. Danbury was an old hat-making town turned quiet suburb, about 60 miles north of Manhattan, the kind of place where volunteer firefighters were the backbone of the community, where teachers stayed in the same school for decades, where the biggest excitement on a Saturday afternoon was a trip to the shopping plaza on Federal Road. The Brandis household was not a Hollywood family by any stretch of the imagination. Greg drove a distribution truck during the week and fought fires on the weekends. Mary taught other people's children. Jonathan's ancestry was a typical American patchwork. His father had English, German, and Scottish roots. His mother was half Irish, half Italian. The surname itself traced all the way back to a great-great-great-grandfather named Henry William Brandis, who had been born in Prussia. They were ordinary people, living ordinary lives, in an ordinary New England town. Greg later said he named his son Jonathan after a cool guy he had known during his years working as a bus driver. But their son had a face that stopped people cold. Mary noticed early on that strangers responded to Jonathan differently than they responded to other children. Something about the eyes, which were an intense and vivid blue. Something about the open, unguarded expression, the ready smile, the way he looked directly at a camera lens, as though he already understood what it was asking of him. She took him to New York City, and before anyone in the family had quite processed what was happening, the 2-year-old had his first job. A print advertisement for Buster Brown shoes, those sturdy little leather shoes with the logo of a boy and his dog stamped on the insole, the shoes that parents bought at Sears and JCPenney, and then watched their children scuffed to pieces within a month. Jonathan posed in a pair of them for a promotional poster. A toddler with a direct gaze and a natural ease in front of the lens, as though being photographed were the most normal thing in the world. The image was printed and shipped to retail stores across the country. It was the beginning of a career that would span his entire childhood and most of his adolescence. And it began not with ambition or a grand plan, but with the simplest thing imaginable. A mother took her good-looking son to the city, somebody handed him a pair of shoes to wear, and a photographer told him to smile. By 4, Jonathan was appearing in television commercials, Kix cereal, Fisher-Price toys. One after another, more than 80 in total by some estimates, each one a small performance lasting a few seconds, each one a paycheck that went into the family bank account. His mother became his manager, a decision that would shape the entire family dynamic for the next 2 decades. Every audition, every early morning call time in Manhattan, every drive through the Lincoln Tunnel was a family production. Greg was proud, and he was supportive. He later said that he had taught Jonathan about the business from an early age, about the difference between doing the work well and getting attention for it. About the importance of keeping your head on straight when people started telling you that you were special. Whether any parent can fully prepare a child for the kind of attention that was coming is an open question, but Greg Brandis tried. At 6 years old, Jonathan landed his first real acting role. He was cast as Kevin Buchanan on the ABC daytime soap opera One Life to Live. It was a recurring part, not a lead, but it required him to commute regularly from Danbury to the production studios in New York City, to memorize dialogue and hit his marks and deliver performances in front of professional television cameras at an age when most children are still learning to tie their shoes in the morning. He stayed with the show for several years, quietly absorbing the rhythms of set life, the language of blocking and coverage and pickup shots, the particular patience required to sit still and wait during lighting changes and crew adjustments. Then, at 9 years old, the family made the decision that would determine everything that came after. They packed their belongings and moved across the country to Los Angeles. In LA, Brandis began the steady, workmanlike accumulation of credits that marked a professional child actor in the late 1980s. Guest spots on shows that were the wallpaper of American domestic life. Kate and Allie, Webster, Who's the Boss, LA Law, Full House, Blossom, The Wonder Years, Murder, She Wrote, Buck James. Each appearance required an audition, a callback, a day or two of shooting, a few lines delivered opposite actors he had watched on his family's television set back in Danbury. None of these appearances were large. He was a child actor doing what child actors do, filling small roles in other people's shows, building a resume one guest spot at a time. He appeared briefly in the 1987 Michael Douglas thriller Fatal Attraction, in a role so minor it barely registered even with people who had seen the film repeatedly, but it placed him on a major studio set. He supplied voice work for the Disney animated film Oliver and Company in 1988 and contributed voiceover to the original Pet Sematary. He attended the San Fernando Valley Professional School, the institution of choice for working child performers in Greater Los Angeles, where young actors took their academic courses around their shooting schedules and could double up on coursework to graduate early when the demands of a production required it. The school existed because the entertainment industry needed it to exist. It was an unusual institution, populated by children who had already seen more of the adult working world than most of the teachers instructing them. None of this made Jonathan Brandis famous. What it made him was employed, which in the merciless economy of child acting in the late 80s was itself a remarkable accomplishment. The overwhelming majority of children who audition in Los Angeles never book a single paid job. Brandis was getting steady, recurring work before he was old enough to get a learner's permit. He was a professional in every sense. But the gap between a working child actor and a genuine star is vast, and it is bridged by one specific role at one specific cultural moment. In the year 1990, 2 such roles arrived for Jonathan Brandis almost simultaneously, one right after the other, and the scale of his life changed in ways that nobody, including him, could have predicted. The first was The Never-Ending Story 2, The Next Chapter. Brandis, now 13, was cast as Bastian Bucks, the boy at the center of the fantasy adventure. The original Never-Ending Story, released in 1984 and directed by Wolfgang Peterson, had become a genuine cultural touchstone for an entire generation of children. One of those rare films that imprinted itself permanently on the memory of everyone who saw it at the right age. A movie that convinced millions of kids that if they just believed hard enough, they could save a dying world by shouting a name into a thunderstorm. The sequel was not as beloved and it was not as commercially successful, but it did not need to be. What it did was put Jonathan Brandis's face on movie posters and home video boxes and rental store shelves from coast to coast for the first time in his career. He earned a Saturn Award nomination for Best Performance by a younger actor. The film was his. He was the lead. His name was above the title. And for a particular kind of audience, the preteen and young teen audience that mattered enormously to the agents and managers and studio development executives who built the careers of child performers, Jonathan Brandis was suddenly visible in a way he had never been before. The second thing that happened in 1990 was Stephen King's It. The ABC television miniseries, directed by Tommy Lee Wallace and adapted by Lawrence D. Cohen from King's massive 1986 novel, was one of the most watched television events of the year. Roughly 30 million viewers tuned in across 2 nights in November 1990, and the broadcast terrified a generation so thoroughly that its effects are still measurable today. Tim Curry's performance as Pennywise the Dancing Clown was so effective, so genuinely and profoundly disturbing, that it created a lasting phobia of clowns in millions of Americans who were children when they watched it from behind couch cushions and through the gaps between their fingers. The adult cast included Richard Thomas, John Ritter, Harry Anderson, Annette O'Toole, Tim Reed, and Dennis Christopher. But the miniseries was built on 2 parallel timelines: the children's story and the adult story, and the children were its emotional heart and soul. Seth Green was cast out of Los Angeles as the young Richie Tozier, the wisecracking kid with the thick glasses. Emily Perkins was cast out of Vancouver as the young Beverly Marsh. And Jonathan Brandis, also cast out of Los Angeles, played the young Bill Denbrough, Stuttering Bill, the leader of the Losers Club, the boy whose little brother Georgie is murdered by the creature in the opening scene, the iconic sequence with the paper sailboat and the storm drain, and the clown's white-painted face leering from the darkness below the street. Bill carries the guilt of his brother's death through the entire narrative. He has to project both vulnerability and quiet authority. He has to rally a group of terrified children to confront an ancient, shape-shifting evil. And he has to do all of this while speaking with a stutter that could easily have become a cheap trick or a comedic gimmick in the hands of a less thoughtful performer. Brandis was 14 years old, and he was extraordinary in the part. He gave Bill Denbrough a trembling, barely held-together gravity that grounded the miniseries' more fantastical elements. His stutter was not a surface mannerism. It felt lived-in, effortful, painfully real. Emily Perkins, who played Beverly, later admitted she had a tremendous crush on him during the shoot. He was really cute, she said, and a very nice boy. Tim Curry's Pennywise was so terrifying on set that several of the child actors refused to go anywhere near him between takes, a detail that captures the intensity of Curry's commitment and the vulnerability of the children who had to act opposite it. The whole production had the charged, electric atmosphere of something that was going to matter in the culture for a very long time. It did matter. And for Jonathan Brandis, the combined impact of the Never-Ending Story 2 and Stephen King's It in the same year created a momentum that propelled him into the next and most visible phase of his young career. The phone began ringing more often. The auditions led to callbacks. The callbacks led to offers. In 1992, he was cast opposite Rodney Dangerfield in Ladybugs, a sports comedy about a bumbling businessman who takes over a girls' soccer team sponsored by his company and secretly recruits his fiancée's athletically gifted son to play on the team disguised as a girl named Martha. The film required Brandis to share the screen with one of the most famous stand-up comedians in the history of American entertainment, to spend much of the running time in a blonde wig and a girl's soccer uniform, and to make the audience simultaneously laugh at the absurdity and root for the kid underneath the costume. Shooting took place in and around Denver, Colorado from July through September 1991. There is a casting detail about Ladybugs that seemed meaningless in 1992, and now carries an almost unbearable weight. Both Jonathan Brandis and Leonardo DiCaprio auditioned for the same role, the part of Matthew, the boy who dresses as Martha. The producers went with Brandis. The reason, according to director Sidney J. Furie, was that DiCaprio looked too convincing in drag, which killed the comedy. The film depended on the audience being able to see through the disguise and laugh at the transparent absurdity of it, and DiCaprio was simply too good at the transformation. So the part went to Brandis, and DiCaprio walked away with nothing but an audition story. In 1992, this was a mildly amusing production footnote, the kind of behind-the-scenes trivia that might show up in a magazine's sidebar. Within just a few years, it would feel like something else entirely. The career of Leonardo DiCaprio, who went from that audition to What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and then to Romeo and Juliet, and then to Titanic, and then to the very summit of American cinema, and the career of Jonathan Brandis, who went from that audition to the cover of Tiger Beat, and then into a silence that deepened year by year, would diverge so completely and so mercilessly that the distance between them became one of the defining ironies of 90s Hollywood. Two boys, the same age, in the same room, reading for the same part. One of them gets the role. The other one gets the world. Ladybugs was savaged by critics. The Rotten Tomatoes score stands at 14%. Michael Wilmington of the Los Angeles Times wrote that it had the stale, slick, worked-over look of standard studio product. Vincent Canby of the New York Times conceded that even when the material was feeble, Dangerfield could sometimes manage to be funny. But the audiences who actually bought tickets, particularly young audiences, felt differently. CinemaScore surveys gave the film an A-, which in the industry's estimation meant that the people who saw it enjoyed it considerably. And for teenage girls across America, Ladybugs was their first real look at Jonathan Brandis as something other than a child. He was growing up on screen before their eyes. He was lanky and fair-haired and funny and possessed of a quiet confidence that read, even through the silliness of the material, as genuine charm. The vast machinery of teen magazine celebrity had begun to grind into motion. That same year, Brandis appeared in Sidekicks alongside Chuck Norris, playing a bullied asthmatic boy who fantasizes about being Norris's martial arts partner. During filming, Brandis stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, the same height as the veteran Japanese-American actor Mako, who also appeared in the film. He was still in the middle of his adolescent growth spurt, and by his late teens, he would reach 5'9". The physical transformation of adolescence was happening in real time, on camera, in front of an audience that was growing larger and more passionate by the month. And then, in the fall of 1993, the role that would make Jonathan Brandis the biggest teen idol of his generation arrived like a wave that nobody had seen coming, and when it broke, it was like nothing anyone around him had ever experienced. SeaQuest DSV was a Steven Spielberg-produced science fiction television series set aboard a futuristic deep submergence vehicle in the year 2018. It premiered on NBC in September 1993. Brandis, now 17, was cast as Lucas Wollensack, a teenage computer genius whose own father had arranged to have him placed aboard the submarine. Roy Scheider, the actor who had stared down a great white shark in Jaws and danced himself into oblivion in Bob Fosse's All That Jazz, played Captain Nathan Bridger, the vessel's reluctant commander. Stephanie Beacham was the chief science officer. The sets were vast and elaborately constructed. The special effects, for 1993 network television, were state-of-the-art and cost a fortune. Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment was behind the production. The show's main title theme, composed by John Debney, would go on to win the 1994 Emmy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Main Title Theme Music. NBC gave SeaQuest a primetime slot and a massive promotional campaign. The expectation, in the industry and in the press, was that SeaQuest DSV would become the next great American science fiction franchise, the rightful heir to Star Trek: The Next Generation. The first season drew enormous ratings, but what nobody at Amblin or NBC or Universal Studios had anticipated was the specific, overwhelming, and almost frightening nature of the audience's reaction to the blonde-haired teenager who played the boy genius on the submarine. The science fiction fans tuned in, as expected. The family audiences tuned in, as hoped. And the teenage girls tuned in numbers that astonished even the most optimistic network projections, and what they were watching for was emphatically not the submarine or the dolphin or the underwater special effects. Within weeks of the premiere, Jonathan Brandis was receiving 4,000 pieces of fan mail per week. 4,000. That is more than 570 letters per day, arriving every single day, including weekends. Many of the letters included phone numbers. Brandis later told interviewers with obvious delight that he would sometimes call the numbers out of sheer curiosity, and the girls on the other end of the line would scream that it was impossible, that it could not really be him, and would hang up immediately. He found this absolutely hilarious. He told the story as though it were the funniest thing that had ever happened to him. Readers of Tiger Beat magazine voted him the #1 dreamboat in America. A readers' poll in 17 magazine named him among the 10 sexiest guys in the country. TV Guide in the summer of 1994 called him the new hot, hot, hot teen mag cover boy. His face appeared on the covers of Teen Beat, Bop, and every other glossy teen publication that lined the racks at supermarket checkout counters from Los Angeles to Bangor, Maine. An action figure was manufactured of his character, Lucas Wollensack. For a period of approximately 2 years, 1993 through 1995, Jonathan Brandis was one of the most famous and adored teenagers in the United States. The reaction from female fans was so intense, so relentless, and so physically demonstrative that Universal Studios in Orlando, where the show relocated for its second season, had to assign 3 studio security guards to escort Brandis to and from the set every single day. The crowds of young women who gathered outside the sound stages were large, and they were persistent, and they were not easily discouraged. The studio took the matter seriously enough to treat it as a security concern. Brandis found the whole phenomenon genuinely bewildering. In a 1994 interview with People magazine, he said something that would take on a very different resonance in the years that followed. "I never perceived myself like this," he said. "A teen magazine kid. As an actor, you just hope to continue working. Then, when you start getting mail, I sure never knew it was coming. It's not something you prepare for." He also complained, with real amusement, about the language the magazines used to describe him. "Teen magazines keep writing that my eyes twinkle when I talk," he said. "Look, I'm a guy. I don't twinkle, you know. You can say that my eyes sparkle maybe, but not twinkle, all right? Got that, teen magazine writers?" His co-star Roy Scheider, watching all of this from the considerable distance of a long and accomplished career in the film industry, offered his own assessment. Scheider told People magazine that Brandis's family life was secure, that the young man took his incredible popularity with a grain of salt. Then Scheider paused and added, with the knowing grin of a man who had been around the block more than a few times, other than the fact he uses it to get girls. Scheider became a genuinely important figure in Brandis's artistic education. Brandis later named him as the single person who had the biggest influence on him as an actor, and the working relationship between the veteran star and the teenage idol, built across 3 tumultuous seasons aboard a fictional submarine, was grounded in authentic mutual respect. When Scheider eventually fought to leave the show, one of the things he left behind was a young man he had quietly mentored. During SeaQuest, Brandis doubled up his courses at the Valley Professional School so he could graduate a full year early in 1993 at 17. He earned his diploma and continued reporting to the set of a major network television show as a fully employed professional actor. He won the 1994 Young Artist Award for Best Youth Actor Leading Role in a Television Series. And through all of it, while the fan mail was arriving in canvas sacks and the magazine covers were multiplying, and the security guards were steering him through gauntlets of screaming girls, Jonathan Brandis was quietly, persistently thinking about a future that looked nothing like the present. This matters enormously, because it is the thread that runs through his entire life story and transforms it from a simple cautionary tale about the dangers of fame into something more complicated and more painful. Even as a teenager, at the very summit of his public visibility, when most young performers in his position would have been perfectly content to enjoy the attention and cash the checks, Brandis was talking seriously and specifically about becoming a writer and a director. He was not musing about it the way teenagers muse about becoming astronauts or rock stars. He was preparing for it. As a boy growing up in LA, he had filmed movies starring his neighborhood friends using a home video camera, casting them in roles and directing the productions himself, teaching himself the visual grammar of cinematic storytelling before he was old enough to take a formal film class. His best friend during those years was the actor Jason Marsden, and one can imagine the two of them running around the valley with that camera, shooting scenes, arguing about angles, doing what young directors have always done, making things up and seeing what they looked like on tape. During the run of SeaQuest, Brandis co-wrote an episode of the series called The Siamese Dream, in which a powerful psychic plants nightmares in the minds of two crew members to gain access to the submarine's nuclear weapons. It was his professional screenwriting debut, and he was 19 years old. He wrote a second script for the show, called The Horizon Crew, that was accepted but never produced. He was scheduled to direct an episode, an almost unheard-of opportunity for an actor his age, but the show was canceled before he had the chance. He took screenwriting classes during his time off. He read scripts obsessively. He was, by every account, deadly serious about this second career. In a 1994 interview, when a reporter asked him how he wanted to be remembered, his answer was immediate and fully formed. "I want to be remembered as an actor who put in some good work in the beginning of his career," he said, "even better work at the end of his career, and slowly, successfully made the transition into writing and directing." He was 18 years old. He knew exactly what he wanted his life to look like. The fundamental problem that would never be resolved, was that the industry he worked in could not see him as anything other than the poster on the wall. He also said something else in that interview, something that slipped past almost unremarked at the time, but that becomes impossible to ignore in retrospect. "My friends would probably describe me as silly," he said, "and honest, and that I think about things a bit too much." While SeaQuest was still on the air, in the spring of 1995, Brandis began dating Tatyana Ali. She was 17, he was 19. She played Ashley Banks on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, one of the most popular sitcoms in American television, which made them instantly one of the most recognizable and most photographed young couples in Hollywood. They had first met 2 years earlier at a mutual friend's Halloween party in 1993, and had spent those 2 intervening years circling each other at industry events, building a friendship before anything romantic could take hold. Ali was interested but careful. Brandis, characteristically, was patient at first, and then boldly decisive. One day he told her flatly, with a directness that was either supremely confident or very slightly insane, "I'm going to stop coming over, and you're going to miss me." She called him the next morning. For the next 6 years, they were together. They went to red carpets. They attended the opening of the Jurassic Park ride at Universal Studios together in June 1996. They co-starred in a television adaptation of the Christopher Pike novel Fall into Darkness. They sat for a joint interview with People magazine in July 1996 that now reads like a lovingly preserved time capsule of young Hollywood in the Clinton era. In a Santa Monica restaurant, Brandis sat absorbed in a game of Miss Pac-Man on the restaurant's arcade machine while Ali watched from across the table with a theatrical pout. He glanced up, noticed her expression, and deliberately let a ghost catch his character. "How many guys," he asked the interviewer with obvious satisfaction, "would be willing to kill their Miss Pac-Man to let their girlfriend play?" He told the magazine, simply, "I love her tremendously." But the People interview also captured the pressures bearing down on a young interracial couple in the mid-1990s. "We go to a club," Brandis said, "and 9 times out of 10 there's a guy there hitting on her. And there was something uglier. We get looks sometimes," he said carefully, referring to the public reaction to there being a white man and a black woman together. Ali described one specific incident in excruciating detail. They were out for a romantic dinner when an African-American man approached the table, leaned close to her, and said, "I want you to know I watch your show all the time. But now that I see you letting this white man date you, I will never watch your show again." Ali told People that the encounter hurt, but she insisted that such reactions only brought the two of them closer together. Don Franklin, who played Commander Jonathan Ford on SeaQuest, told the magazine that the couple really worked on their relationship, visiting each other on weekends even when they were filming in different cities, even when SeaQuest moved across the country to Orlando. And that move to Orlando was where the professional trouble began in earnest. The first real tremor in the ground beneath Jonathan Brandis's feet. SeaQuest DSV's first season had been a genuine ratings success. But behind the cameras, the production was in disarray almost from the first week of shooting. 2 executive producers departed before the season was fully underway. The cast, the remaining producers, and the network were all pulling in different directions, each with a different vision for what the show should be. Then, heading into the second season, NBC made a series of creative and logistical decisions that would ultimately prove fatal. The show's format was overhauled, new characters were introduced, old ones were dropped. The tone shifted away from the grounded military science fiction that had attracted the first season audience and moved toward the fantastical and the bizarre. And perhaps most disruptively, the entire production was relocated from Los Angeles to Orlando, Florida, uprooting every member of the cast and crew. The relocation was devastating. 2 actors were pushed out of their roles by the producers. 2 more left of their own accord, citing both the cross-country move and the increasingly poisonous atmosphere on set. Stephanie Beacham, John DeQuino, and Stacy Haiduk all departed. An entirely new group of cast members was brought in to fill the empty chairs. The show's identity kept shifting under the feet of the people who were trying to perform it. Roy Scheider, who had signed on to captain what he understood to be a serious and literate science fiction series, found himself required to act opposite telepaths and genetically engineered super soldiers in storylines that bore no resemblance whatsoever to the show he had originally agreed to do. He was openly furious. He made his displeasure known publicly and repeatedly. He fought with the producers to be released from his contract. By the 3rd season, now retitled SeaQuest 2032, the series was in a full-blown crisis. The storyline had been catapulted forward 10 years by means of an alien abduction. Scheider was finally released, and he departed. Michael Ironside replaced him as a gruffer, more militaristic captain. Cast members continued to cycle in and out like passengers on a bus. The audience, which had been large and enthusiastic in the first season, was draining away week by week. Through every one of these upheavals and implosions, Jonathan Brandis stayed. He appeared in all 57 episodes of the series, every single one, across all 3 seasons. He was the only actor in the entire production to accomplish this. He and Don Franklin and Ted Raimi were the only 3 cast members who lasted from the first episode to the cancellation notice. But Brandis alone never missed a single installment. He showed up on time, he knew his lines. He delivered his performances with commitment and professionalism even as the creative walls crumbled around him. People later speculated about why he stayed when others left. Perhaps he felt a loyalty to NBC. They had taken a chance on a 17-year-old and built a show partly around him. They had allowed him, at 19 years old, to write an episode of their primetime television series, an opportunity that was extraordinary for an actor of any age, let alone a teenager. He repaid that faith by standing at his post until the lights went out and the cameras stopped rolling. NBC canceled SeaQuest abruptly in the middle of the 3rd season, in 1996. Jonathan Brandis was 20 years old. He had given the network 3 full years of his life, his entire adolescence, his high school diploma rushed through early to accommodate their production schedule. He had moved across the country when they told him to move. He had stayed when everyone else was leaving. And now it was over. The 4,000 letters a week would dwindle to a trickle and then to silence. The 3-guard security escort through the crowds at Universal Studios would no longer be necessary. The covers of Tiger Beat and Bop and 17 would feature new faces, younger faces. The machinery of teen celebrity had already begun to rotate toward its next product, its next dream, its next #1 dreamboat. This is the place in the story where, if this were a kinder narrative, the trajectory would simply pivot. Young actor rides a wave, the wave crests, the wave breaks, and the actor dries himself off and walks toward the next chapter of his life. That is what is supposed to happen. It is what happens for many people. But Jonathan Brandis's wave did not simply break. It receded so slowly, so silently, and so thoroughly that by the time he fully understood the scale of what was happening, there was almost nothing left beneath his feet. After SeaQuest, Brandis took what the industry offered him, and what it offered was a steep and immediate decline. He appeared in a television movie called Her Last Chance in 1996 with Kelly Martin. He flew to South Africa to shoot Born Free, a new adventure, a TV movie that also starred Chris Noth as his character's father. These were paying jobs, legitimate work, and Brandis was not someone who looked down on honest employment. But they were a very long distance from Steven Spielberg and primetime NBC and 4,000 fan letters a week, and being escorted through crowds by security guards. He voiced Mosenrath, an evil young sorcerer, in Disney's animated television series Aladdin. The voice work paid the bills, but it was invisible to the general public. Nobody saw his face. He was a voice coming out of a cartoon villain. He enrolled in screenwriting classes. He read stacks of scripts. He waited for the telephone to ring the way it used to ring. In 1999, he appeared in 2 films that offered genuine glimpses of what he might become if the industry would allow it. Outside Providence, directed by Michael Corrente and adapted from a novel by Peter Farrelly, was a scrappy and affectionate coming-of-age comedy set in the 1970s, and Brandis played a supporting character called Mousy. He dyed his hair dark for the part and was all but unrecognizable. He disappeared into the role the way a serious actor is supposed to. And Ride with the Devil, directed by Ang Lee, was a genuinely ambitious Civil War Western with an ensemble cast that included Tobey Maguire, Skeet Ulrich, and the singer Jewel. Brandis played a character named Cave Wyatt and grew a beard for the role. An Akron Beacon Journal film critic praised his work, writing that Brandis displayed that he had the talent to be an actor of substance. Both films were well-reviewed, but modestly attended. Neither was a commercial hit, and the audiences that had once packed Universal Studios to catch a glimpse of him had moved on with their lives. They were in college now, or starting careers, or falling in love with someone who wasn't on a television screen. Hollywood had already decided, as it always does, that the Jonathan Brandis era was finished. He auditioned for the role of Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars, Episode II, Attack of the Clones. He lost the part to Hayden Christensen. He went stretches of a year or more without meaningful employment. He tried to reinvent his physical appearance. He wore different glasses for one audition. He played against type whenever the opportunity arose. None of it generated the kind of attention that translates into steady work. In the year 2000, he filmed a dark comedy called Bad Girls from Valley High that would sit on a shelf for 5 full years due to distribution problems, not reaching audiences until 2005, 2 years after his death. He briefly dated the actress Monica Keena, and then, sometime in 2001, after 6 years together, Jonathan Brandis and Tatyana Ali quietly and privately ended their relationship. The reasons were never made public. Ali would go on to release albums and guest star on television series before eventually meeting her husband, an English professor at Stanford University named Vaughn Raspberry, through the dating site eHarmony. They married in 2016 and had 2 sons. Her life continued. Brandis was left alone at 25 in an apartment in Los Angeles, with a career that was contracting and the most important relationship of his adult life behind him. The breakup removed the most stable element in his world at the exact moment when he was most desperately in need of something to hold on to. People close to him began to notice changes. He was harder on himself, more withdrawn, quicker to turn inward. The creative ambition was still burning, the desire to write and direct, to be recognized as a serious artist. But it was edged now with something that looked like desperation, a bitterness that could curdle without warning into despair. Friends from that period said he seemed different. Something fundamental had shifted behind those famous blue eyes that the magazines had once described as sparkling. Then came the moment in the theater, Heart's War. The $70 million World War II production shot partly in the Czech Republic. Bruce Willis, Colin Farrell. A real role in a real film with a real theatrical release date. For a man who had spent 5 years watching his professional life contract, who had gone from 4,000 letters a week to a silent mailbox, this felt like the lifeline he had been waiting for. Friends said he was energized and hopeful and visibly alive in a way they hadn't seen in years. He traveled to the Czech Republic. He shot his scenes. He came home and waited for the movie to come out and change things. The film was released on February 15, 2002. It earned $33 million against its $70 million production budget, a significant commercial failure. But the failure at the box office was not what devastated him. What devastated him was the discovery that nearly all of his scenes had been cut in the editing room. His one speaking scene, a crude joke during a group conversation, appeared only on the DVD as a deleted extra. In the film that played in actual movie theaters, he had been reduced to background. A face in a crowd, an indistinguishable figure among other indistinguishable figures. One person on an internet forum later wrote that if you looked carefully, you could spot Brandis and Sam Worthington both brooding in the background, and that Brandis had a particularly good scene where he stares out the window. Stares out the window. That was what remained of his comeback. After Hart's War, the drinking escalated. Friends reported that it was heavy and regular and getting worse. The depression that had been building steadily for years deepened into something his friends could no longer dismiss or explain away. And then Jonathan Brandis said something that alarmed everyone who heard it. He told multiple people, in clear and unmistakable language, that he intended to end his own life. For those who remembered the kid his father described as very smart, very polite, and always easygoing, these words seemed to issue from a stranger, from someone they did not know and could not reach. And yet Brandis continued working. He shot a substantial role in Puerto Vallarta Squeeze, an action drama opposite Harvey Keitel, in which he played a CIA hitman named Neil Weatherford. It was a morally complex character, exactly the kind of work the 18-year-old version of himself had craved. The film would not be released until 2004, after his death. He also completed a short film he had written and directed called The Slanesville Boys. It would have been his directorial debut. He was 27 years old, and he was finally behind the camera, doing the very thing he had been talking about and working toward since he was a kid with a handheld video camera in the San Fernando Valley. In the spring of 2003, Brandis traveled to Toronto to shoot the pilot for a new television series called 111 Gramercy Park, a drama set in an upscale Manhattan apartment building that followed the intertwined lives of its wealthy residents and the maids, nannies, and maintenance workers who served them. The cast was notable: Frank Langella, Peter Strauss, Tippi Hedren, Erica Durrance, and Jaleel White, who had become famous as Steve Urkel on Family Matters and who was, like Brandis, a former child star navigating the uncertain and often humiliating terrain of adult Hollywood. White and Brandis had crossed paths before. In the late 1980s, both had appeared in the pilot for a show called Good Morning, Miss Bliss, which was eventually retooled and became, without either of them, the hit series Saved by the Bell. They were not close as children and had taken very different paths through the industry. Their nearest personal connection, White later recalled, was a mutual acquaintance, the actress Tatyana Ali. Brandis had been Ali's real-life boyfriend when White shot his one guest appearance on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and White remembered with gentle humor that Ali was so smitten with Jonathan that during their scripted on-screen kiss, she turned her head so far toward the camera that their lips barely touched. "Got it, Tatyana," White wrote in his memoir. "No one is misconstruing our professional duty." But during the 3 weeks of filming 111 Gramercy Park in Toronto, sharing dinners and drinks with the cast in the evenings, a genuine friendship formed between the two men. And what Jaleel White noticed, and what he would describe years later in his memoir Growing Up Urkel, was the desperate, almost unbearable intensity of Jonathan Brandis's investment in this pilot's success. White wrote that he had never known an actor to ask him repeatedly about their pickup prospects the way Brandis did during those 3 weeks. The question came up again and again. Had anyone heard anything from the network? What were the odds? Was there any word? White, who had been in the business long enough to read the signs, understood exactly what was happening. He wrote that Brandis, like himself, had come to yet another career crossroads, but that for Brandis, the stakes were existentially different. For White, 111 Gramercy Park was just another character role, and there would be many more opportunities down the road. For Brandis, this pilot would have offered him an honest chance at leading man status, a chance to prove that he could anchor a television show as an adult the way he had anchored one as a teenager. It seemed to White that Jonathan felt he needed that pilot to feed his soul. The pilot was not picked up by any network. One more door closed. There had been so many. At approximately 11:40 on the night of November 11th, 2003, a friend entered Jonathan Brandis's apartment in the 600 block of Detroit Avenue in Los Angeles. He found Brandis in the hallway. He had hanged himself. The friend called 911 immediately. Paramedics from the Los Angeles Fire Department responded and transported Brandis to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He was still alive when he arrived, but the injuries he had sustained were catastrophic. The following day, November 12, 2003, at 2:44 in the afternoon, Jonathan Gregory Brandis was pronounced dead. He was 27 years old. He did not leave a note. No message to his parents. No message to his friends. No letter for Tatyana Ali. No explanation. Nothing. The Los Angeles Police Department issued a public statement on November 20th confirming the circumstances of the death. The shock spread outward in concentric circles. Robert Katz, who had produced Puerto Vallarta Squeeze and had worked with Brandis only months earlier, said that his first response when he heard the news was, "No, no, no, wrong guy." Jaleel White, sitting at his home computer, read the report and wept. He went to find his mother. She came into his office, saw his tears, and began to cry as well. "I can't do this anymore, Mom," he told her. "This business kills people from the inside." White would later describe Brandis's death in his memoir as that of a fallen soldier. He wrote that he had dedicated his entire life to achieving what Leonardo DiCaprio and the rest of his peer group had seemingly accomplished with ease. Tatyana Ali's response, when she was eventually able to speak about it, was not grief in the conventional sense. It was anger. She was angry at him. It is the particular anger of someone who loved a person deeply for 6 years, who ended that relationship only 2 years before, who perhaps understood the weight he had been carrying better than anyone else on earth, and who still could not reconcile the person she had known, the boy who had once deliberately sacrificed his Miss Pac-Man game to let her play, with the choice he had made alone in a hallway. And then there was Soleil Moon Frye, the actress who had played Punky Brewster in the 1980s, and who had been one of Brandis's closest friends throughout the 90s. Frye and Brandis had grown up together in the insular, incestuous world of young Hollywood, part of a sprawling social circle that also included Brian Austin Green, Mark Paul Gosselaar, David Arquette, Stephen Dorff, and dozens of other young performers who were famous before they were old enough to fully understand what fame was doing to them. Frye said something, years after Brandis's death, that carried the specific corrosive weight that only guilt can give to words. She said she had some elements of guilt about not seeing the pain he was in. "How often do we really look at each other," she asked, "and go, 'How are you?' and actually hear what someone is saying? I learned that I just wasn't listening in the way I do now." Frye and Brandis had shared a ritual during those years before cell phones and text messages and social media changed the texture of human communication forever. They left each other voicemails, long ones, very long ones. Brandis had a particular habit that was apparently both charming and maddening. He would press the pound key on the phone to keep the answering machine recording going past its normal limit, and then he would just talk. He would fill up Soleil Moon Frye's entire answering machine tape, 20 minutes, sometimes 30, with a torrent of rambling, joking, restless energy. He did impressions. He told stories. He was silly and loud and relentlessly entertaining, performing even when his audience was a magnetic strip inside a plastic cassette. And then, in the final 30 seconds of those recordings, after all the noise and all the comedy, he would get quiet. He would say what he actually felt. The real thoughts, the true feelings. His innermost thoughts, as Fry would later describe them. Buried at the very end of the tape, past the laughter, past the voices, past everything, as though he could only be honest when he was almost out of time. Nearly 20 years after those voicemails were recorded, Soleil Moon Fry went back and listened to every single one of them. She found so many of them, she told People magazine. Some of them were 10 minutes long, his innermost thoughts. It just made me cry listening to them. He was a real friend. In one of her old diaries, she also discovered an entry she had forgotten. It said that she and Jonathan had once spoken about getting married someday, about having a family together. In 2021, Fry released a documentary called Kid 90 on Hulu. Leonardo DiCaprio served as an executive producer through his Appian Way Productions banner. The film was built on the extraordinary personal archive that Fry had accumulated throughout her youth and stored in Tupperware containers for more than 20 years without looking at any of it. Home video footage, diary entries, audio recordings, and voicemails. When she finally opened those containers, she said later, she opened Pandora's box. Jonathan Brandis's parents, Greg and Mary, approved the use of footage of their son in the film. In Kid 90, Jonathan Brandis appears alive. Young, laughing, filling a room with his energy. A warm presence, one reviewer wrote. The documentary captures something that no obituary or Wikipedia article or fan tribute page had been able to convey. The sound of his actual voice, the way he moved through a room, the person he was when he was not performing. That same year, 2021, Greg Brandis, now an older man who had spent 18 years trying to understand what happened to his only child, sat for an interview with People magazine. What he said reframed the entire narrative of his son's death. His death wasn't due to the entertainment industry, Greg said. I look back now, and in his 20s, he showed signs of manic depression. I hope that anyone suffering can go get help. Bipolar disorder, manic depression, a psychiatric condition characterized by recurring cycles of extreme emotional highs and devastating, paralyzing lows. A condition that can make a person appear energized and ambitious and overflowing with creative plans one week and unable to get out of bed or see any reason to continue the next. A condition that in the late 90s and early 2000s was frequently undiagnosed in young men, especially in professional environments like the entertainment industry where emotional volatility could be mistaken for artistic temperament, where mood swings could be attributed to the natural pressures of a difficult career, where vulnerability was something you concealed behind a joke and a performance, and 20 minutes of restless noise on an answering machine tape. Greg Brandis was not offering this as an excuse. He was not attempting to absolve the entertainment industry of its role or to minimize the pain his son had experienced. He was offering the piece of the puzzle that had been missing for almost 2 decades. It does not contradict the career disappointments. It does not erase the anguish of Heart's War, or the humiliation of the canceled pilot, or the years of silence and rejection. But it suggests that what the outside world interpreted as a man destroyed by Hollywood may have been something more layered, more clinical, and ultimately more human than that. A man whose own neurochemistry turned every professional setback into something that felt existential and final, who could not access the resilience and perspective that carry most people through the lean periods of their lives, who experienced each loss not as a temporary reversal, but as a confirmation of his deepest fear. My biggest fear as an actor, he had once said, is being involved in something mediocre, or being mediocre myself. The pattern his friends described in his final years is consistent with what his father later revealed. Periods of energy and optimism followed by devastating crashes. The excitement about Heart's War. The total devastation when his scenes were cut. The renewed hope surrounding 111 Gramercy Park. The crushing despair when the network passed. Each cycle a little shorter than the one before. Each crash a little steeper. each recovery less complete. Jonathan Brandis's remains were cremated. His ashes are in the possession of his family. 2 of his final projects were released after his death. Puerto Vallarta Squeeze appeared in 2004. Bad Girls from Valley High was finally distributed in 2005. The Slanesville Boys, the short film he wrote and directed, was completed in 2003 but has never received any form of wide distribution. The film he made with his own hands, the one that represented the fulfillment of the creative dream he had articulated at 18 years old, exists somewhere in a format that almost nobody has ever watched. In the years since his death, something has happened that Jonathan Brandis could never have foreseen. Something that carries its own particular cruelty. The Internet, a technology that did not exist in any meaningful consumer form during the years of his greatest fame, has carried his name and his image forward into a world he never knew. Fans who grew up watching SeaQuest DSV and Ladybugs and The Never-Ending Story 2 and Stephen King's, it created tribute pages, shared video clips, posted personal memories and reflections. His name surfaces regularly in online discussions about child actors who deserved better outcomes, about the quiet and terrible toll of early fame, about the unbridgeable distance between a face on a magazine cover and the person behind the face. On Instagram alone, he has been tagged in over 40,000 posts, the vast majority of them from people who never met him, who never heard his voice except through a television speaker, but who remember with absolute clarity what he meant to them at 12 or 13 years old, when they were the age at which a person falls helplessly and permanently in love with the faces on the screen. The Buster Brown shoes. It is a detail that seems almost too symmetrical, too perfectly circular to be true. But it is true. His career began at 2 years old, posing for a promotional poster for a brand of sturdy children's shoes. The kind that fits small feet and lasted through a season of rough play. And by the time he was 27, those shoes no longer fit. He had outgrown them completely, but nobody in the industry had offered him a new pair. He was too old to be the boy on the poster, and too young to have assembled the body of work that might have carried him into the kind of creative life he actually wanted. He was caught in between, stuck in the hallway, not the hallway of his apartment building on Detroit Avenue, but the hallway between who the world thought he was and who he knew, with absolute certainty, he could become. His father still speaks to him. "I talk to him and it makes me smile," Greg Brandis told People magazine in 2021. "I get the feeling he's looking down at me." On a shelf somewhere, in a home in Los Angeles, Soleil Moon Frye still has the answering machine tapes from the 1990s. On those tapes, past the jokes and the impressions and the accents and the 20 minutes of a young man's relentless, overflowing, almost desperate energy, past the performances he could not stop giving even when there was no audience, no camera, no magazine photographer, no one at all in the room, there are a few quiet sentences at the very end, his innermost thoughts, the real voice, the one he saved for the last 30 seconds, when the tape was nearly full and the time was almost up. Jonathan Brandis took his own life on November 12, 2003. He was 27 years old. Nobody was listening then. A lot of people are listening now,